I was in 5th grade when my class went to a summer camp for a field trip. The trip was planned for 3 days, and we were supposed to learn about nature, outdoor survival, and some other useless things you forget once you go back home. Day 1 was mostly spent unpacking, doing the introduction, and a campfire at night. It was on day 2 when we finally got to do some things out in the woods. The guide showed us some insects, taught us how to tie different knots, and some basic things about navigating in the woods. Most of the kids had their own little group. I, for example, was with my friends Sean and Patrick. But there was this kid named Lester who had no friends to hang out with. Of course, the whole class was in the same area, but none of the classmates would speak to him or do things together with him. I thought about bringing him into our group, but I just didn't have the balls to befriend the official loser of our class. Believe me, I'm ashamed to admit that. Anyhow, we participated in several different activities during the day. We had fun for the most part, and the time was about 5 p.m. by the time the teachers wrapped up all the outdoor activities. We weren't too far deep in the woods, but our teacher, along with the teachers of other classes, began doing head counts for their respective classes. Everyone was present, for the exception of Lester. Our teacher, Mr. Hammond, called out for Lester, but he didn't answer the call. He began to panic and asked the other teachers for help to look for him. 2 out of the 5 teachers led us back to the camp, while the guides and the rest of the teachers continued the search for Lester. Night came, the police had arrived by then, but Lester was still not found. Up to that point, I had never seen a grown man cry in real life, but on that night, Mr. Hammond turned on the waterworks and no one was able to console him. As you might imagine, the mood in the camp was somber and subdued. I went to bed that night feeling guilty for not bringing in Lester into our group. I kept asking myself why I wasn't brave enough to not be swayed by what others may think. I was raised to do the right thing, but my actions spoke otherwise. I felt ashamed. Morning came and I woke up to the screams and laughter coming from the outside. A few other kids and I who woke up stepped outside to check out what the commotion was all about. When we opened the door and took a few steps toward the main building, we saw that Lester had come back. He had a blanket draped over him, but I could still tell he was fully naked underneath. He seemed to be in a state of shock as he didn't respond to the people around him. I walked over to him and one of the teachers was about to stop me when Mr. Hammond intervened. I said to Lester, "Hey, we're all glad to see you back." Lester didn't even look at me. Talking to him was no different than talking to a mannequin. It was as if only the shell of Lester had come back. I don't have much information on what happened to him after that. Lester was taken on an ambulance and the rest of us had left the camp on the same day. I learned of some additional information about Lester later in life. Apparently, the police had no clue how Lester had come back to the camp without being seen. There were close to 100 people out searching for him, not to mention that plenty of adults were near the camp. It seemed impossible for them to not notice Lester until he walked right into the camp. As for what happened to Lester after that day, I hear his mind had never come back to him. He's been in that vegetative-like state ever since that day. But that's about the extent of information I've got on him as far as his current state of health is concerned. Till this day, no one's really figured out what happened to Lester at the camp. We don't understand how he was able to make his way back to the camp when his mind was completely blank. It's by far the darkest memory in my life, and it's rather unpleasant to think about it even as an adult. It's a real shame that I didn't have the guts to invite him into our group. If I had the means to go back in time, I would do things differently. I truly would. I was 12 years old when my parents sent me off on a 2-week-long college camp. There, we were to learn about working in the medical industry. We had professors and doctors come talk to us about becoming a biologist, MD, and medical scientist. It was by far the best camp I had ever been to as far as the quality of education is concerned. We used the empty dorm rooms for sleeping accommodations. The one downside of the camp was the lack of air conditioners in the middle of the summer. The windows were bottom hinged that only opens slightly at the top, restricting airflow. Not to mention there were plenty of insects outside. The nights were as miserable as they can get. My roommate was this kid named James. He was friendly and talkative. I lucked out as far as roomie was concerned. Although, to my credit, James thought the same of me. We got along really well, and that helped us cope with the miserable nights. We enjoyed talking to one another so much that most nights we fell asleep in the middle of conversations. Then I believe it was on the night of day 6 when we found out something useful by chance. You see, the security guard does sweeps of the dorms a few times every night. The last sweep is done at midnight, then he never comes back. So on the 6th night, we left our door open after midnight, hoping that it would help with the airflow. To our surprise, it did, by a lot. James and I fell asleep, but I woke up sometime later. I thought I heard a noise out in the hallway, and that's likely what woke me up. I got up and poked my head out the door. That's when I saw a man enter a room down the hallway. I tiptoed toward the room and peeked inside ever so slightly. It was the room occupied by Jason and Luke. In the room, the man had a scissor in his right hand and was about to snip a lock of hair of one of the kids. I quickly tiptoed back to my room and woke up James. The plan was to go to the teacher's room and take James with me for safe measure. But by the time James had woken up, the man was out in the hallway. I shut the door quietly and dragged the chair toward it. I propped it underneath the doorknob just like in the movies. James and I held on to the chair and dreadfully waited for the creep to reach our room. Minutes had passed when someone twisted our doorknob, but the door wouldn't budge. James and I were terrified. I struggled to breathe as if the air had been sucked out of the room. I looked at James and he wasn't faring any better. The man struggled with the doorknob for a while but quit after about a minute. I heard the footsteps moving toward the next room. We failed to fall asleep after that. We went straight to one of the teachers in the morning and told her everything about the previous night. That day, we had about a dozen campus police interviewing people and searching different buildings. They found the creep before the day was over. It was one of the security personnel the camp had hired. The creep was caught while trying to get rid of the evidence, the lock of hairs he had collected. The campus police saw him dump a black plastic bag in one of the large dumpsters. They stopped him and searched the contents of the bag. The hairs of the kids were found inside. He was arrested on the spot and had to do some time for his crime. I believe my parents know the details of the case, but I never asked them about it. I was always curious, but I think I just wanted to move on from the incident. I really hope the creep never got to work around kids ever again. This incident happened 14 years ago, not long after I turned 13. It was in the middle of July, and my parents had signed me up for summer camp. Physical activity was the core value of the camp. I was a bit overweight at the time, and I suppose my parents wanted to help me get in shape. At the camp, we did lots of swimming and hiking, mixed in with some basketball and soccer. All activities ended at 5 p.m., then the rest of the day was filled with speeches, games, and/or reading sessions. We were sent to our room by 7 in the evening, and showers were mandatory. Basically, we had 2 hours of free time until bedtime at 9. I fell asleep around 9:30, but my roommate woke me up at 2 in the morning. Kane whispered to me to be quiet, pointed at the window, walked toward it, then gestured for me to come. I walked up to the window, but then Kane quickly pushed my shoulder down. There were people out in the yard, and he didn't want us to be seen by them. The people outside were wearing strange clothing. They looked ritualistic. Imagine a cape with different shades of dark colors. Then make some cuts from shoulder high to all the way down to the bottom. That's what I saw these people were wearing. They looked strange and scary. Upon further inspection, I was able to identify the individuals as our teachers. They had torches in their hands and were mumbling something that I couldn't comprehend. After a couple of minutes, a group of teachers separated further away into a large circle. That's when I saw a kid lying on a wooden table. The kid seemed to be unconscious as the ritual proceeded. They used strange-looking knives to mimic slicing and stabbing motions on the child. I would cringe and twitch every time the knives got near the kid's body. The ritual continued for about half an hour. At the very end, they poured wine on the child's belly and drank the spills dripping off his waist. I think the wine symbolized the blood. Essentially, our teachers wanted to stab us and drink our blood. Suffice it to say, I was terrified and could hardly fall asleep that night. Come morning, I told the teachers I had to make a phone call to my parents. We weren't allowed to make calls during the camp, but I lied to them that my sinus was acting up. I told them I had to go back home to see my doctor. It's true that I had suffered from sinus infection quite often, but it was a lie that it was affecting me at that point in time. I had to go home. I needed an excuse, one that my parents would buy as well. Sinus infection was the perfect excuse to get me out of there. Meanwhile, Kane couldn't come up with anything and they remained at the camp. However, I did get the phone number of his parents to get him out of there somehow. I told my parents about the ritual on the ride back home. I also gave them the number of Kane's parents. We stopped at a rest area and Dad got out of the car to speak to Kane's parents. I know that Kane was picked up right after the call ended. My parents called the police and they advised us to come into the station. When we got there, we waited for a social worker who specializes in children's something, I forget. The police interviewed me when the social worker arrived. Then shortly thereafter, they raided the camp and subsequently found the clothing and equipment used in the ritual. They were hidden in a shed at the back of the camp. Most of the teachers at the camp had to do time for their actions. Some of them didn't because they were relatively new to the cult and/or had limited participation. As for the cult itself, it was a cell of a larger organization. The police didn't get to arrest the true leaders of the cult, but at the very least, they managed to put a few of the cultists behind bars. It's pretty insane to think about this again today. It makes me wonder what could have happened had the cult members been more experienced. I can't say for sure, but I believe things could have transpired very differently. Hey guys, Dennis here. It's been a while and I do apologize for that. I guess there's only one way to say it. My grandma passed away in an accident and for a while, I just didn't have the mindset to make videos. Long story short, my grandma and I, we always had a great relationship until the last few years. We were at odds due to some problems with my uncle, that's her son of course, and let's just say that our relationship suffered because of that. So when she passed away, not due to normal causes, it put everything into perspective. I regret a lot for not coming to an understanding with her. The fact that I couldn't bridge the gap between us before the end made me feel terrible. I had to take some time from my everyday routine and reassess my life. I always thought that I put my family first, but that wasn't the case at all. I've had tremendously difficult time in the past due to some poor life decisions. I was completely destroyed personally, professionally, and financially for a while. Therefore, I put work ahead of everything. It was important to me that I could take care of myself first and foremost. I had to make sure that I wouldn't be a nuisance to anyone in my life ever again. But as is all things in life, balance is everything. I should have taken the time to hash things out with my grandma. I should have been spending more time with my family and friends too. So that's what I did the last few months. At present, I think I found the right balance between work and personal relationships that are hugely important to me. And now I'm back. Life continues. I can't dwell on the past. I much rather look forward to the future and try to fix the problems at hand. Although I'm not really sure for how long I'll be sticking around, seeing as how I left the channel unattended for several months, 5 months maybe. I doubt that the numbers will look pretty going forward. I've only got a few subscriber submitted stories left in my inbox. I'm not at all certain the type of contents I'll be working on in the future. Bear with me as I try to evolve as a content creator. Article 13 will change everything on YouTube going forward. There's going to be a lot of adapting to do. With that said, thank you guys for waiting, if you were waiting. I wonder how many of you will be watching this. I do apologize for disappearing without saying anything, and hopefully we'll pick things up from where we left off and continue on. Lastly, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to those of you who don't celebrate Christmas. I'll see you on the next one. Goodbye for now.